cold crept through the northern realms like a patient predator. It seeped beneath doorframes and wound its tendrils around the hearts of all who dared call this unforgiving land home. Aria Wolfsbane had known this cold intimately for the 28 years of her life, yet never quite managed to make peace with it. The bitter chill seemed to find her even now, deep in the whispering woods, where summer's last breath still warmed the earth. Her fingers moved deftly among the undergrowth, separating the healing gold root from the deadly night fern that so closely resembled it. Only the faintest purple glow around the poisonous plant's edges marked the difference, a glow invisible to ordinary eyes. Aria saw what others could not. The colors that surrounded all living things, revealing their nature, their intentions, sometimes even glimpses of their futures. A gift, her grandmother had called it. A curse, the villagers of Ravenhollow named it. A strand of auburn hair fell across her face as she worked, and she tucked it behind her ear with soil-stained fingers. Her basket already brimmed with herbs for fever, roots for pain, and berries that, when crushed and mixed with pine sap, could draw infection from the deepest wounds. The forest had always provided for her, even when mankind would not. A rabbit darted between the trees, its aura a gentle blue tinged with flecks of yellow, contentment mixed with caution. Aria remained perfectly still, watching as the creature paused, nose twitching. For a moment, their eyes met across the small clearing, neither predator nor prey, but fellow inhabitants of this ancient wood. The rabbit's aura suddenly flared crimson. Danger. It bolted away, vanishing into the underbrush just as the memories crashed over Aria like a wave. Her grandmother's face, lined with age, but eyes still fierce as she pressed the knowledge of herbs and healing into Aria's young mind. The night they came for her, torches blazing against the darkness. Witch, they had called her, as if the word itself were poison. Her grandmother standing tall, even as the flames licked at her feet. Remember, child, what they fear is what they do not understand, and what they do not understand, they destroy. Aria's hand trembled as she placed the final roots in her basket. 20 years had passed since that night, yet the memory burned as fresh as yesterday. She had hidden in the forest then, a child of 8, watching from the shadows as they took everything from her. When dawn broke, she returned to find only ashes where her home had stood. She had survived, learned, grown stronger in her solitude. The village still whispered about the witch's granddaughter who lived at the forest's edge, but they came to her door nonetheless when fever struck their children, or when wounds festered beyond their simple remedies. The sun hung low now, painting the forest in amber and gold. Time to return. Aria rose, brushing the soil from her simple woolen dress, and started the journey back to her small cabin. The path was familiar beneath her feet, winding through ancient oaks and silver birches that had stood since before the founding of Northaven itself. Northaven, the great kingdom that sprawled across the northern territories, ruled for 1,000 years by the Bloodcrest line. Kings and queens who, legend said, carried the blood of wolves in their veins. Tales told in hushed voices around hearth fires spoke of the first kings who could shed their human forms beneath the full moon, taking the shape of massive wolves to defend their lands against invaders. Such stories were deemed mere fantasy now, the stuff of children's bedtime tales. Yet Aria knew better than most how truth could hide within legend. As she neared the edge of the forest, the trees thinned and her small cabin came into view. Smoke curled from its stone chimney into the evening sky. Simple yet sturdy, built by her own hands over the years. A home, if not the one she had been born to. The sound of approaching hooves drew her attention. Aria stepped back into the shadow of an ancient oak, watching as a village woman rode past on a tired-looking mare. Eliza Thornfield, the miller's wife, her aura a churning mix of desperation and fear. She would be coming to the cabin soon enough, Aria knew. The fever had reached their youngest child. They always came when their own remedies failed. Aria waited until Elisa disappeared around the bend before continuing home. As she approached her cabin, she noticed fresh boot prints in the soft earth of her garden. Someone had come while she was gathering, someone heavy and purposeful, a man by the depth of the impressions, yet nothing appeared disturbed or taken, a warning perhaps, or simple curiosity. Either way, she would reinforce her protections tonight. Inside the cabin, she hung her basket from a ceiling beam and stoked the dying embers in the hearth. The single room gradually filled with warm light, illuminating shelves of dried herbs, jars of salves, and books, the few treasures she had managed to salvage or trade for over the years. Knowledge preserved in leather and parchment when human memory failed. The festival of the blood moon would begin tomorrow night in the village square. Once each year, when the moon hung full and crimson in the autumn sky, the people of Ravenhollow celebrated the old ways, whether they understood them or not. They would drink mead from carved horns, dance around great bonfires, and speak the ancient prayers for protection against the coming winter. Aria never attended, not since the burning. Yet as she prepared her simple evening meal of bread and forest mushrooms, something tugged at her thoughts, a feeling she had learned never to ignore. Tomorrow would bring change. She could sense it in the air, taste it like metal on her tongue. For better or worse, the world would shift beneath the blood moon's gaze. Sleep came fitfully that night, dreams filled with running wolves and crowns of antlers. Aria woke before dawn, her nightdress clinging to her skin with cold sweat. The dreams lingered like morning mist, half-remembered, yet insistent. She rose and splashed water on her face from the basin, watching ripples disturb her reflection. Today, she would break her own rule. Today, she would go to the festival. The decision settled in her chest like a stone. Foolish, perhaps. Dangerous, certainly. Yet some compulsions could not be denied, especially for one with the gift, or curse, of foresight. As twilight descended the following evening, Aria donned her best dress, a simple garment of deep green wool with sleeves long enough to hide her hands if needed. Over this, she draped a hooded cloak of undyed wool that would help her blend into the shadows at the festival's edges. Around her neck, on a leather cord, hung her grandmother's final gift, a small pouch containing herbs of protection and a single raven's feather. The village square blazed with light as she approached, keeping to the shadows between houses. 3 massive bonfires had been built, forming a triangle at the center of the celebration. Between and around them, villagers danced to the music of pipes and drums. Mead and ale flowed freely, loosening tongues and feet alike. Children darted between adults, faces painted with symbols whose meanings had long been forgotten. Aria kept her hood raised, moving like a ghost along the perimeter. Some noticed her, a few eyes widening in recognition, several mothers pulling their children closer as she passed. Yet none confronted her. On this night, even the witch's granddaughter might be granted a temporary reprieve from ostracism. She positioned herself beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak that overlooked the square. From here, she could observe without drawing undue attention. The musicians played faster now, a primal rhythm that seemed to reach into the chest and quicken the heartbeat. The dancers moved with abandon, shedding the constraints of their daily lives beneath the rising blood moon. The air shifted suddenly. Aria felt it before she saw anything change. A ripple of awareness spreading through the crowd like a stone cast into still water. Conversations hushed. The music faltered. Eyes turned toward the north end of the square. Riders appeared from the darkness. 5, then 10, then more, their horses' breath clouding in the cool evening air. At their head rode a man whose presence commanded attention even from this distance. Broad-shouldered and tall, he sat his midnight stallion with the easy confidence of one born to authority. A cloak of rich black fur draped his shoulders, secured by a silver clasp in the shape of a wolf's head. "The king," someone whispered nearby, voice thick with awe and fear. "King Magnus himself." Aria's breath caught in her throat. King Magnus Bloodcrest, ruler of Northaven, had no business in a remote village festival. The royal court resided in Wolfhaven, the capital city 3 days' hard ride from here. Kings did not venture to the borderlands without purpose. The crowd parted as Magnus dismounted, moving with fluid grace that belied his imposing size. His dark hair, streaked with a single band of silver, despite his relatively young age, was pulled back from a face that might have been carved from the northern mountains themselves, all sharp angles and unyielding planes. Yet it was his eyes, visible even from this distance, that arrested Aria's attention. Pale blue, almost silver in the firelight, they surveyed the gathering with measured assessment. And surrounding him, visible only to Aria's sight, blazed an aura unlike any she had witnessed before. Silver and deep sapphire blue, pulsing with barely contained power. Within it, shapes seemed to form and dissolve. A crown, a wolf, a sword, each lasting only an instant before melding back into the swirling energy. Then, as if sensing her scrutiny, those pale eyes lifted. Across the crowded square, through dancing villagers and leaping flames, King Magnus looked directly at her. Something passed between them, a recognition that transcended ordinary awareness. His aura flared brighter, reaching toward her like fingers of light. Aria took an involuntary step backward, pressing against the rough bark of the oak. He knew. Somehow, he knew what she was. The village elder approached the king with trembling deference, offering welcome and hospitality. Magnus inclined his head, but did not shift his gaze from Aria's position. Only when his captain leaned in to speak softly in his ear did he finally turn away, allowing Aria to breathe again. She should leave. Every instinct screamed for immediate retreat to the safety of her forest home. Yet her feet remained rooted to the ground as she watched the village elder guide the king to the seat of honor, a carved chair draped with autumn leaves and berries. His men dispersed among the villagers, accepting offered drinks with practiced courtesy. "He's looking for someone," a voice said quietly beside her. Aria startled, turning to find an old man standing where no one had been moments before. Thin and stooped, with a white beard that reached the middle of his chest, he leaned on a gnarled staff of dark wood. His eyes, deep-set beneath bushy white brows, held a keen intelligence that belied his frail appearance. "Who are you?" Aria whispered, noting the strange golden-green aura that surrounded him, ancient in its quality, unlike the typical signatures of the villagers. "Names matter less than purpose, young seer." The old man's voice carried despite its softness, seeming to bypass her ears entirely. "And my purpose, like his, concerns you." Aria tensed. "I don't know what you mean." The old man smiled, revealing teeth too perfect for someone of his apparent age. "Your grandmother taught you better than to lie to your elders, Aria Wolfsbane." The use of her name sent a chill down her spine. Few in the village even knew it, preferring instead to refer to her by cruder designations. "What do you want?" She kept her voice low, eyes darting toward the king, who was now engaged in conversation with the village elder. "To warn you, to guide you. The paths of fate converge tonight beneath the blood moon." The old man gestured toward the sky, where the full moon indeed hung heavy and crimson. "He has found you at last, though neither of you yet understands why. The king knows nothing of me. Does he not?" The old man's eyes twinkled. "Why then does his gaze return to you even now?" Aria looked back toward the center of the square. True to the stranger's words, Magnus was once again watching her, ignoring whatever the elder was saying. This time, she did not look away. A challenge in her stance, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "What am I to him?" she demanded, turning back to the old man. "What the moon is to the tide, what the earth is to the seed." He reached into his ragged cloak and withdrew something that caught the firelight. A stone no larger than a robin's egg, deep blue and pulsing with inner light. "This belongs to you. It has always belonged to you, since before your birth." He extended his hand, offering the stone. Aria hesitated, then slowly reached out. The moment her fingers touched the smooth surface, images flashed through her mind. A throne room with tall windows, a forest engulfed in flames, an infant crying, blood pooling on stone floors. She gasped, nearly dropping the stone, but the old man closed her fingers around it. "Keep it close. When the time comes, you will understand its purpose." "What time? What purpose?" Aria clutched the stone, which felt warm against her palm, almost alive. The old man's expression grew serious, the humor vanishing from his ancient eyes. The last of the seers meets the last true alpha. Together, they will either rebuild what was broken or watch it crumble to dust. He glanced toward the king. He carries its twin, though he knows not what it truly is. When blood calls to blood, neither stone nor steel can prevent what must be. Before Aria could question him further, a commotion erupted near the central bonfire. A child had stumbled too close to the flames, her dress catching fire. Screams pierced the night. Aria's healer instincts took over. She rushed forward, shrugging off her cloak as she ran. Reaching the child, she wrapped her in the heavy wool, smothering the flames before they could do more than singe the outer layer of clothing. The girl sobbed in terror rather than pain, largely unharmed thanks to the quick action. Aria checked her quickly, finding only minor redness on one arm. From her dress pocket, she produced a small vial of salve, applying it gently to the affected skin. "She's fine," she announced to the mother, who hovered anxiously nearby. "Keep this covered with the salve tonight and tomorrow. It will prevent blistering." Only then did Aria become aware of the silence that had fallen over the gathering. She had revealed herself in her haste to help. Dozens of eyes stared at her, some with fear, others with the more dangerous light of righteous anger. The witch's granddaughter had dared to touch one of their children. "Step away from the child." The command came not from the mother, but from a burly man Aria recognized as the village blacksmith. His aura pulsed angry red, tinged with the sickly yellow of fear-fueled hatred. Aria rose slowly, hands visible at her sides. "I've done nothing but help." "We don't need your kind of help," the blacksmith growled, advancing. Others moved with him, emboldened by numbers and ale. "My father told me how your grandmother bewitched the animals, made the milk turn sour when crossed." Old accusations, old superstitions. Aria backed away, scanning for an escape route. The crowd had closed around her, cutting off the path to the forest. The child's mother snatched her daughter away, though the girl called out, "She helped me, Mama. The Fire Lady helped." "Fire Lady indeed," someone muttered. "Like calls to like." A terrifying familiar scene was unfolding. Torches, angry faces, accusations flying like arrows. Aria's hand closed around the blue stone in her pocket, seeking some comfort from its warmth. "Enough!" A single word, spoken not loudly but with such authority that it seemed to press against the very air. The crowd parted, revealing King Magnus striding forward, his face impassive, but his eyes burning with controlled anger. "Is this how the people of Northaven reward one who saves a child?" His voice carried the weight of mountains. "With threats and baseless accusations?" The blacksmith faltered, his anger giving way to uncertainty before his king. "Your Majesty, you don't understand. I understand perfectly," Magnus interrupted, now standing between Aria and her accusers. "I witnessed what happened. The child would have suffered grievous harm had this woman not acted." He turned slightly, those pale eyes finding Aria's. Something passed between them, an unspoken communication that sent a shiver through her body. Not fear, but recognition, like finding something long sought without knowing it had been missing. "What is your name?" he asked, voice softening. She hesitated, then lifted her chin. "Aria. Aria Wolfsbane." A flicker of surprise crossed his features, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. An old name, a respected name once. The festival had effectively ended. Villagers drifted away in small groups, casting backward glances. The king's men remained alert, watching for any further trouble. Magnus himself seemed unconcerned, his attention fixed wholly on Aria. "Walk with me," he said. Not a request. Aria glanced toward the forest path, calculating her chances of simply running. Slim, with mounted soldiers nearby, and something deeper held her in place. Curiosity, perhaps, or fate, if one believed in such things. They walked in silence toward the edge of the village, stopping at the stone well that marked its boundary. Above them, the blood moon cast its crimson light across the land. Magnus removed his riding gloves, tucking them into his belt, then turned to study her more carefully. "You have her eyes," he said finally. "Elendra Wolfsbane, your grandmother, I presume?" Aria stiffened. "You knew her?" "Of her," he corrected, resting one hand on the well's stone wall. "The last of the royal seers, or so it was thought, until tonight." "I don't know what you mean." The denial came automatically, a lifelong habit of self-preservation. Magnus smiled, though no warmth reached his eyes. "Don't you? I saw how you watched me, Aria Wolfsbane. Not with the awe or fear of these villagers, but with recognition. You saw what others cannot." His voice dropped lower. "The aura, is that what you call it? The light that surrounds a person, revealing their true nature?" Her silence was answer enough. 200 years ago, Magnus continued, the Great Purge swept through Northaven. Those with abilities were hunted down, executed as threats to the natural order. History records it as the triumph of reason over superstition. His mouth twisted in bitter irony. History is written by victors, not victims. "Why are you telling me this?" Aria asked, though a cold certainty was already forming in her mind. "Because the time of hiding is coming to an end." He reached inside his tunic and withdrew a chain. Hanging from it was a stone identical to the one the old man had given her, the same deep blue that seemed to pulse with inner light. Because for the first time in 2 centuries, the seer and the alpha stand face to face beneath a blood moon, and that is no coincidence. Aria's hand went to her pocket, feeling the answering warmth of her own stone. "Who was that old man? The one who gave me this?" Magnus frowned. "What old man?" Before she could explain, a rider approached at speed, the hooves of his mount kicking up dirt as he reined to a sharp halt beside them. The captain of the king's guard, his face grave in the moonlight. "Your Majesty," he said with terse urgency, "a message from the capital. It's begun." Something dark and dangerous flashed across Magnus's face. He nodded once, a decision made. "Prepare the men. We ride within the hour." He turned back to Aria, intensity radiating from him like heat from a forge. "Our conversation must wait, it seems. But make no mistake, Aria Wolfsbane. We will finish it." With that, he strode away, his cloak billowing behind him like wings in the night breeze. Aria watched him go, the blue stone burning against her palm, her mind reeling with implications and possibilities. Something monumental had been set in motion tonight, something that would change her life and perhaps the kingdom itself. She needed to prepare. Aria returned to her cabin under the watchful eye of the blood moon. Inside, she moved with swift efficiency, gathering essential herbs, tools, and the few personal treasures she couldn't bear to leave behind. Intuition told her she had little time. Whether the danger would come from the king or from those who feared what he had recognized in her, she could not say. As she worked, the blue stone lay on her table, its glow casting strange shadows across the cabin walls. Occasionally, images formed within its depths: a throne room, a battlefield, a crown rolling across stone floors. Visions of what might come, or what must be prevented. The burden of the seer, to glimpse fragments of possible futures without the full tapestry's context. A sound outside, the snap of a twig, deliberate and close, brought her to sudden stillness. Someone watched the cabin. Moving silently to the window, she peered through a gap in the shutters. The old man stood in her garden, leaning on his staff, looking directly at her hiding place, as if the walls between them were transparent. Aria unbolted her door and stepped outside, the stone clutched in her hand. "You knew," she accused without preamble. "You knew he would recognize me. You knew what would happen." The old man's face remained serene in the moonlight. "I knew what could happen, what should happen. The future branches like a river delta, young seer. I merely helped guide the flow." "Who are you? Really?" "Some call me Thorn." He smiled, the gesture softening his ancient face. "A keeper of old knowledge, a guardian of forgotten ways." "The king didn't see you at the festival." It wasn't a question. "Few see me unless I wish it." Thorn tapped his staff against the earth. just as few saw the truth of you until tonight." "And what is the truth of me?" Aria demanded, fatigue and fear making her voice sharper than intended. "You are the last of the true seers, not mere fortune-tellers or dream-walkers, but those who can perceive the threads of fate itself." He gestured toward the stone in her hand. "That is a lacrim, a tear of the wolf, created in the first age when the pact between seers and alphas was forged. Magnus carries its twin." "What does that mean for me, for him?" "It means change comes on swift wings." Thorn glanced toward the sky, where clouds now scudded across the face of the blood moon. "The usurper moves against the throne even now. Blood will be spilled before dawn breaks." "Usurper?" Aria frowned, trying to make sense of his cryptic warnings. "Garrick Blackthorn, the king's cousin. He has coveted the crown since childhood, and tonight he makes his move." Thorn's expression darkened. "He has embraced forbidden arts, old magics that were banned for good reason. If he succeeds, darkness will fall over Northaven such as hasn't been seen in 1,000 years." A cold weight settled in Aria's stomach. Political machinations of the royal court had never concerned her, isolated as she was in her forest exile. Yet something in Thorn's words rang with terrible certainty. "What does any of this have to do with me?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Everything." Thorn stepped closer, his ancient eyes suddenly ablaze with intensity. "Magnus is not merely king. He is the last true alpha, the first in 3 centuries who can fully transform, who carries the undiluted blood of the first pack. And you, Aria Wolfsbane, are the last true seer. Together, you could restore the balance that was destroyed during the Great Purge." He reached out, closing his gnarled hand around hers, where she held the stone. "An old prophecy speaks of this moment. When the blood moon rises red as fire, the last seer and last alpha shall meet. Their union will either heal the broken land or seal its doom for all time." Aria pulled away, overwhelmed. "I don't want this. Any of this. I've spent my life hiding, surviving. I don't care about prophecies or thrones or ancient pacts." "Don't you?" Thorn's voice gentled. "Is that why you came to the festival tonight, despite years of avoiding such gatherings? Because you don't care? Or because something inside you, the same gift that shows you the auras of others, told you that tonight would change everything?" He was right, and they both knew it. Some compass within her had pointed toward this night, this meeting, for reasons she was only beginning to comprehend. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now you prepare." Thorn looked toward the forest, suddenly alert. "He will come to you sooner than you think, wounded in body and spirit, carrying the future of Northaven in his arms. What you decide then will change not just your life, but the fate of kingdoms." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give." He pressed something else into her hand, a small pouch that smelled of herbs she didn't recognize. "For the fever that will come. Brew these with moon water when the time is right." Before she could question him further, the distant sound of horses reached them, many horses, moving at speed. Thorn cocked his head, listening. "The king rides for Wolfhaven," he said, "but he will not reach it in time. The blade meant for his heart has already been sharpened." He fixed Aria with a penetrating stare. "Remember who you are, daughter of seers. When the moment comes to choose, let your gift guide you, not your fear." With those final words, he turned and walked into the shadows between the ancient oaks. Aria blinked, and he was simply gone, as if the darkness had swallowed him whole. The following 3 days passed in a state of heightened tension. Aria slept little, jumping at every sound from the forest. She prepared healing poultices, dried additional herbs, and reinforced the simple protections around her cabin, symbols carved into the doorframe, bundles of rowan and hawthorn hung from the eaves. No news came from the capital. The village continued its ordinary rhythms, unaware of the prophecies and portents that had been revealed beneath the blood moon. Only Aria waited, balanced on the knife edge of anticipation, for what she now believed was inevitable. On the third night, a great storm swept in from the northern mountains. Rain lashed against her windows like tiny fists demanding entry. Lightning turned the sky white, and thunder shook the very foundations of her small home. Aria sat beside her hearth, the blue stone, the lacrim, hanging from a leather cord around her neck. It pulsed with soft light, as if in time with a distant heartbeat. The knock, when it came, was so forceful, she thought for a moment it was merely another thunderclap. Then it came again, urgent and desperate. Aria rose, clutching the knife she'd kept close since the festival night. For a heartbeat, she considered ignoring the summons, barring the door, hiding until whoever stood outside gave up and left. But the lacrim burned suddenly hot against her skin. Once, twice. A signal she somehow understood with bone-deep certainty. Aria unbolted the door and pulled it open. Rain and wind whipped inside, along with the unmistakable metallic scent of fresh blood. King Magnus Bloodcrest stood before her, his proud frame bent with exhaustion and pain. Blood ran freely from a wound at his temple, mixing with the rain to stain his torn tunic crimson. His silver-blue eyes, fevered and desperate, locked onto hers with the last vestiges of his strength. But it was what he cradled in his arms that stole Aria's breath. A small bundle wrapped in a sodden royal cloak. A tiny hand reached free of the wrappings. The weak cry of an infant rose above the storm's fury. "Please," Magnus said, his voice rough and nothing like the commanding tone he'd used at the festival. "They're hunting us. My son, he needs help. He needs you." The lacrim burned like fire against Aria's chest. The moment Thorn had warned about had arrived. The choice that would change everything stretched before her, a threshold as significant as any in her life. Thunder crashed overhead as Aria made her decision. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," she said, "quickly before they see you." As Magnus crossed her threshold, the blue stone at his throat glowed in perfect harmony with hers. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Aria's small cabin, something new had begun, something that terrified her more than all the village whispers and threats ever could. For the first time since her grandmother's death, Aria Wolfsbane was no longer alone, and with that simple change, the fate of an entire kingdom shifted course, moving toward either salvation or destruction. Blood dripped onto Aria's wooden floor, forming a dark pool at the king's feet. Magnus Bloodcrest swayed, his powerful frame weakened by wounds and exhaustion. The infant in his arms whimpered softly, sensing the tension that filled the small cabin. Outside, the storm continued its assault, thunder shaking the foundations as if nature itself reflected the turmoil of the kingdom. "They killed everyone loyal to me," Magnus said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "My guards, my advisors, all dead." Aria worked swiftly, clearing her table of herbs and bowls. "Lay him here," she instructed, gesturing to the infant. Her healer's instincts took over, pushing aside the fear and uncertainty that churned within her. This was the moment Thorn had warned about, the crossroads where her decision would change the fate of Northaven itself. Magnus carefully placed his son on the table. The baby's face, scrunched in discomfort, was a miniature version of his father's, the same strong brow, the same determined set to his tiny mouth. Only when separated from his child did Magnus finally allow his own pain to register. He staggered, catching himself against the wall, leaving a smear of crimson against the wood. "You're bleeding heavily," Aria observed, already gathering her healing supplies. "Sit before you fall." The king obeyed without protest, sinking onto her single chair. His silver-blue eyes never left his son, as Aria examined the infant first, unwrapping the soaked royal cloak with gentle hands. The baby, Leo, she would later learn, was mercifully unharmed, merely cold and frightened. "He hasn't eaten properly in 2 days," Magnus explained, as Aria wrapped the child in a dry blanket. "We've been running, hiding. My cousin's men are everywhere." Aria nodded, laying the baby in a makeshift cradle fashioned from her gathering basket. She turned her attention to Magnus, who sat unnaturally still, like a wounded predator conserving strength. Blood soaked through his torn tunic from multiple wounds, the worst being a deep gash across his ribs. Without asking permission, she began cutting away the fabric. "Garrick planned this for months," Magnus continued, wincing as Aria cleaned the first wound. "He poisoned half my guard during the celebration feast for Leo's birth. The others he turned with promises of gold and power. The wound beneath her hands was deep but clean, a sword strike delivered with precision. Professional. The work of a trained assassin, not a common soldier." Aria applied pressure to stem the bleeding, her fingers working with practiced efficiency. "You should have sought help from one of your loyal lords," she said, reaching for her needle and thread. "Why come to me?" Magnus looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You know why." The lacrim stones at their throats pulsed in unison, as if acknowledging the truth neither of them fully understood yet. Aria broke the gaze first, focusing on stitching the wound. Her grandmother had taught her the healer's art from childhood, how to close wounds, brew remedies, ease pain with herbs and touch. But she had never treated a king before, never treated a true alpha. "The bleeding will stop, but infection is the real danger," she said, keeping her voice clinical, detached. It was easier than confronting the strange connection between them, the pull she had felt since their eyes first met at the festival. "These herbs will help, but you need rest." "Rest is a luxury I cannot afford," Magnus replied, though his body betrayed him with its weakness. "Garrick will not stop hunting us. My son is the rightful heir, the only threat to his claim." As if responding to his father's words, little Leo began to cry, a thin, hungry wail that tugged at something deep within Aria. Without thinking, she picked him up, cradling him against her chest, swaying gently to soothe him. "He needs milk," she said. "I have goat's milk that can be warmed." Magnus watched her with his son, something soft passing over his features. "You're good with him." "I've helped deliver many babies in the village," Aria replied, though she rarely mentioned her services to the community that shunned her, when they have no other choice but the witch's granddaughter. While preparing the milk, Aria kept the baby close, warming his tiny body against hers. Magnus struggled to his feet, moving to the window to peer through the shutters at the storm-lashed night. The firelight cast his shadow large against the wall, reminding Aria of the stories her grandmother had told, tales of the first Alpha Kings who could shed their human forms and run as wolves beneath the moon. "Can you still change?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could consider its implication. Magnus turned, surprise evident on his face. "You know of that?" "My grandmother spoke of the old days, before the Great Purge, when kings could take wolf form and seers stood at their side." Aria dipped a clean cloth into the warmed milk and brought it to Leo's mouth. The baby sucked eagerly, his small hands grasping at the fabric. "The ability has weakened over generations," Magnus admitted, returning to his chair with careful movements. "Most cannot transform at all anymore. Those who can manage only partial shifts, claws perhaps, or heightened senses." He paused, watching his son feed. "I am different." "You can fully transform," Aria stated, not a question this time. "Yes, the first in 3 centuries to do so. It's why my father named me heir, despite Garrick being older. The bloodline runs true in me." Pride mingled with weariness in his voice, "and now in my son." Aria focused on feeding the infant, absorbing this confirmation of what Thorn had told her. Magnus was not just any king, but a true alpha, the first in generations, just as she was the last true seer. Pieces of an ancient puzzle brought together beneath a blood moon. Leo finished his meal and dozed off in her arms, content and warm at last. Aria returned him to the makeshift cradle, then turned her attention back to Magnus's remaining wounds. The king submitted to her ministrations in silence, his breathing growing more labored as exhaustion claimed its due. "You need sleep," she insisted after bandaging the last cut. "Take my bed. The child can stay in the basket nearby." "And you?" Magnus asked, his eyes already heavy-lidded. "I'll keep watch by the fire." He seemed about to argue, but lacked the strength. With Aria's help, he made his way to her small bed in the corner of the cabin. As soon as his head touched the pillow, sleep claimed him, his body surrendering to the healing process. Aria settled into her chair by the fire, knife ready in her lap. Thunder still rumbled outside, though the storm's fury had begun to abate. In the relative quiet, reality settled over her like a heavy cloak. The king of Northaven lay wounded in her bed. His infant son slept in a basket beside him. And somewhere out there, men hunted them both, men who would not hesitate to kill her as well if they discovered her role in sheltering the rightful king. The blue stone at her throat, the lacrim, pulsed gently as if to reassure her. Aria closed her hand around it, finding comfort in its warmth. What had Thorn called it? A tear of the wolf, created when the first pact between seers and alphas was forged. Now, centuries later, that ancient bond stirred again, awakening in her powers she barely understood. Sleep proved elusive that night. Aria dozed fitfully in her chair, waking at every sound, the crackle of the fire, the soft breathing of the baby, the occasional pained murmur from Magnus as he fought inner battles in his sleep. When dawn finally arrived, pale light filtering through the shutters, she rose stiffly to check on her patients. The baby still slept, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Magnus, however, burned with fever. His skin was hot to the touch, his breathing shallow. Infection had set in despite her efforts. Aria placed a cool cloth on his forehead, her mind racing through remedies. Fever in a normal man was dangerous. In an alpha, with their heightened metabolism, it could be deadly. She remembered Thorn's parting gift, the pouch of unfamiliar herbs. "For the fever that will come," he had said. How had he known? Questions for another time. She retrieved the pouch from her pocket and sniffed its contents. The scent was strange yet familiar, reminiscent of mountain pine and winter berries, with an underlying sharpness that tingled her nose. Trusting the old man's wisdom, Aria brewed the herbs into a strong tea. When it was ready, she returned to Magnus's side, lifting his head gently. "Drink," she urged, pressing the cup to his lips. "This will help the fever." Magnus's eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused. "Elara?" he whispered, a name Aria did not recognize. "No, it's Aria. You're safe. Drink this." He complied, swallowing the bitter brew with a grimace before sinking back into restless sleep. Aria wondered who Elara might be. A wife, perhaps? The baby's mother? Magnus wore no marriage band, and he had traveled alone with his son. Questions without answers, at least for now. The day passed in a rhythm of caring for both father and son. Aria fed Leo regularly, cleaned and redressed Magnus's wounds, and applied cool cloths to his burning skin. The fever raged despite the herbs, drawing the king into delirious dreams where he muttered commands to unseen soldiers and pleaded with shadows. By nightfall, Aria's worry had deepened. The fever showed no signs of breaking. Leo grew fussy, perhaps sensing his father's distress. She paced the small cabin, the infant in her arms, singing soft lullabies her grandmother had taught her, songs from the old times when magic flowed freely through the land. "Your papa is strong," she whispered to Leo as he finally drifted to sleep. "The strongest of his line in generations. He will not leave you." Setting the baby down, Aria returned to Magnus's side. His condition had worsened. Sweat soaked the bedding, and his powerful frame trembled with chills. She had used every remedy she knew, every herb in her stores. Only one option remained. One her grandmother had warned was to be used only in direst need. Blood healing, the oldest magic, born from the connection between all living things. It required no special ability, only the willingness to give of oneself, to offer life energy to another. Aria hesitated, her hand hovering over the king's chest where the worst wound festered beneath its bandage. Blood healing created a bond, temporary but profound. For a normal person, the effect would fade in days. But with an alpha, with the lacrim stones connecting them already, the consequences were unpredictable. A particularly violent shudder ran through Magnus, deciding her. Aria removed the bandage from his wound, then took up her small knife. With a quick motion, she drew the blade across her palm, opening a shallow cut. Blood welled immediately, bright against her skin. "By my blood to yours," she whispered the ancient words. "By my life to yours, I offer healing." She pressed her bleeding hand directly to Magnus's wound. The effect was immediate and startling. Heat flared between them, not the heat of fever, but something else, a current of energy that raced up her arm and spread throughout her body. The lacrim at her throat blazed with blue fire, matched by the stone against Magnus's chest. Visions flashed through Aria's mind. A throne room with tall windows, soldiers fighting in rain-soaked courtyards, a crown rolling across stone floors. Magnus's memories, or possible futures, she could not tell. The connection deepened, drawing her further in, showing her fragments of the king's life, his childhood in the palace, the weight of the crown placed upon his head, his joy at his son's birth, his horror at Garrick's betrayal. Then, unexpectedly, she felt Magnus's consciousness stir within the bond. His presence brushed against her mind, confused at first, then focused with sudden intensity. He was experiencing her memories as she experienced his, her grandmother's lessons, the village children's cruelty, her years of solitude in the forest. The balance of power between them shifted, equalized, neither giving nor taking more than the other. When Aria finally broke the connection, withdrawing her hand from the wound, she found it healed, not completely, but significantly. The angry redness had faded, the edges knitting together cleanly. More importantly, Magnus's fever had broken. His breathing grew deeper, more regular, his face relaxing into true sleep rather than fevered unconsciousness. Aria bandaged her own cut hand, feeling lightheaded from the energy transfer. The blood healing had worked better than she had dared hope, but it had also changed something fundamental between them, forged a link that went beyond the physical. She sank into her chair, exhaustion claiming her at last. As sleep overcame her, the lacrim continued to pulse gently against her skin, in perfect harmony with its twin upon the king's chest. Whatever destiny had brought them together, they were now bound by blood as well as stone. Dawn brought the sound of voices in the distance, pulling Aria from deep slumber. She jerked upright, instantly alert, her hand reaching for the knife that had fallen to the floor during the night. Outside, men called to one another. Search patterns, methodical and military. Garrick's soldiers had found their trail. Aria moved swiftly to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. 6 mounted men in the livery of the Royal Guard moved through the edge of the forest, clearly tracking something or someone. Their weapons gleamed in the early light, and their faces held the hard determination of seasoned hunters. Heart pounding, she turned to check on Magnus. To her shock, he was awake, sitting up in the bed, his attention fixed on the sounds outside. Their eyes met, and a current of understanding passed between them, remnants of the blood healing perhaps, or simply the shared awareness of danger. "How many?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "6 that I can see," Aria replied, moving to gather Leo from his basket. The baby still slept, blissfully unaware of the threat. "But there may be more." Magnus nodded, rising with careful movements. His wounds clearly pained him still, but the fever had broken completely. He stood straighter than seemed possible for a man who had been at death's door just hours earlier. "They'll check every dwelling," he said, reaching for his sword belt where it hung on a peg. "We can't stay here." Aria cradled Leo protectively against her chest. "The forest. I know places they won't find us." A sharp knock at the door froze them both. Magnus's hand went to his sword hilt, drawing the blade with barely a whisper of steel against leather. Aria backed toward the rear of the cabin, where a small door led to her herb garden. "Open in the name of King Garrick," a voice commanded from outside. "Royal inspection." Magnus's expression darkened at hearing his cousin named as king. He stepped closer to Aria and Leo, placing himself between them and the door. "When I engage them, take Leo and run," he whispered. "Head deep into the forest. I'll find you." Aria shook her head vehemently. "You're still wounded. There are too many." "I've faced worse odds," Magnus replied, a dangerous gleam entering his eyes. The pounding at the door grew louder. "Open now, or we break it down!" Magnus seemed about to respond when a strange calm settled over his features. He straightened, lowering his sword slightly, and closed his eyes. When they opened again, they had changed, no longer entirely human. The silver blue had intensified, the pupils elongating into vertical slits. "Stand back," he told Aria, his voice deeper, resonating with power. Before she could protest, Magnus strode to the door and threw it open. 6 royal guards stood with weapons ready, startled by the sudden appearance of the man they hunted. Their captain recovered quickly, raising his sword. "Traitor king," he spat. "Surrender now, and Lord Garrick may show mercy to your child." Magnus stood unnaturally still. "You will lower your weapons," he said, his voice carrying a strange harmonic quality that seemed to vibrate the very air. "You will kneel." To Aria's astonishment, the guards' expressions went blank. As one, they lowered their swords. Then, moving like puppets on strings, they sank to their knees in the mud before the cabin. "You will tell me who sent you," Magnus continued in that same compelling voice. "Who else knows I am here?" "Lord Garrick sent us," the captain responded tonelessly. "A villager reported seeing a wounded stranger meeting with the forest witch. We were dispatched to investigate." Aria winced at the description, but remained silent, watching this display of alpha power with growing understanding. The voice, her grandmother had spoken of it, a gift of the alpha bloodline that allowed them to command obedience from those of weaker will. "How many others search for us?" Magnus asked. "A full company marches a day behind," another guard replied, his voice as flat as his commander's. "We were sent ahead to scout." Magnus nodded, satisfaction flashing briefly across his face. "You will return to this company. You will report that you found nothing but an empty cottage. The witch has not been seen for days." "We found nothing," the guards repeated in unison. "The witch is gone." "Now go," Magnus commanded. "Ride east, not west. Take the long path back." Without another word, the guards rose, mounted their horses, and rode away in the direction Magnus had indicated, opposite from where they had come. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded did the king close the door and turn to Aria, who stood frozen in amazement. Leo still held protectively in her arms. "The voice," she whispered. "I thought it was just legend." "Few can use it," Magnus admitted, leaning heavily against the door. The display of power had clearly drained his recovering strength, and even those who can only have access to it for short periods, in times of great need. Aria approached cautiously, shifting Leo to one arm so she could help Magnus back to the chair. "Will it last? Their obedience?" "Long enough for us to be gone from here," he said grimly. "But Garrick will send others when these fail to return on schedule. We cannot stay." The reality of the situation settled over Aria like a weight. Her home, her sanctuary for so many years, was no longer safe. She would have to leave everything behind, her garden, her stores of herbs, the small comforts she had built for herself in her exile. Yet strangely, the prospect did not fill her with the dread she might have expected. The cabin had never truly been home, merely shelter. Home had been lost long ago when flames took her grandmother and childhood innocence in one terrible night. "I know a place," she said, decision made, "deep in the forest, an old temple from before the founding of Northaven. Few know it exists, and those who do believe it cursed." Magnus raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" "Only with dust and forgotten memories," Aria replied, already moving to gather essentials, food, blankets, her healing supplies, and the few treasures she couldn't bear to leave behind. "But it has stone walls and a roof that doesn't leak. We can hide there, at least for a while." As she packed, Leo awoke, blinking up at her with unfocused eyes that would someday mirror his father's silver-blue gaze. He made a small sound of contentment when he saw her face, already recognizing her after just one day. Something squeezed in Aria's chest at that innocent trust. "He likes you," Magnus observed, watching them with an unreadable expression. "Babies are good judges of character," Aria replied softly, tucking a blanket around Leo's small form. They see what adults often miss. Within the hour, they were ready to leave. Aria took a final look around the cabin that had sheltered her for 5 years. It felt strange to walk away, yet also right, as if this moment had been waiting for her all along, predestined by forces she was only beginning to understand. Outside, morning mist still clung to the forest floor, providing additional cover for their escape. Magnus carried Leo in a sling across his chest, one hand always near his sword hilt. Aria led the way, following paths only animals usually traveled, paths her grandmother had shown her long ago. They moved in silence through the ancient wood, each lost in private thoughts. The forest felt alive around them, watching, waiting. Every snap of a twig made them freeze. Every bird call might be a signal. But hour after hour passed without any sign of pursuit. By midday, they reached a small stream where they paused to rest and give Leo some milk. "How much farther?" Magnus asked, scanning their surroundings with the practiced eye of a warrior. "Not far now," Aria assured him. "Just beyond that ridge." Magnus nodded, but she could tell something still troubled him. He sat on a fallen log, Leo cradled securely in his arms, and fixed her with a penetrating gaze. "The men," he said finally. "They called you a witch." Aria looked down at her hands. "That's what the village has always called me, and my grandmother before me." "Because of your gift? The seeing?" "That, and the healing." She shrugged, an old defense mechanism against the pain of rejection. "People don't trust what they don't understand." Magnus was quiet for a moment, watching her with those unsettling eyes that seemed to see far more than the surface. "I understand," he said simply. 4 small words, but they struck Aria with unexpected force. Her entire life, she had been the outsider, the other, the one to be feared and avoided. Now this man, this king, this alpha, looked at her and claimed to understand. More surprisingly, she believed him. "We should continue," she said, uncomfortable with the moment's intensity. "There are still several hours of daylight left." They resumed their journey, the forest growing thicker, wilder as they ventured deeper than most humans ever traveled. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wider than 3 men standing with arms outstretched. Moss hung from branches like green beards. The very air felt different, older, heavy with secrets. Finally, they reached a place where vines and bushes grew so thick they formed a wall of green. Aria pushed aside a curtain of ivy to reveal a narrow path, almost hidden from view. "This way," she whispered. Magnus followed her through the green tunnel. When they emerged on the other side, he stopped, his breath catching audibly. Before them stood the temple, not grand or tall, but beautiful in its way. Built of gray stone now covered in moss and flowering vines, it had one main room with walls still standing strong, though the wooden door had rotted away long ago. Statues guarded the entrance, their faces worn smooth by time and weather. "Who built this?" Magnus asked in wonder. "My grandmother said it was here before our people came," Aria explained, leading the way toward the entrance. "Built to honor the old gods who ruled the forest and sky." Magnus approached one of the stone statues, touching it with reverence. "My grandmother told stories of such places, sacred grounds where the veil between worlds grows thin." Inside, the temple was cool and dim. Dust and leaves covered the stone floor, but the roof had held, keeping the space dry. At the far end stood an altar of some kind, a flat stone table now serving as home to small ferns and moss. "It needs cleaning," Aria said, suddenly worried that the king would find it too simple, too primitive. He was used to palaces, after all. But Magnus only nodded, looking around with approval. "It's perfect," he declared. "Hidden, defensible. We'll be safe here while I recover fully and plan our next move." As they set about making the ancient temple habitable, Aria felt a strange sense of peace descend. This morning, she had awakened in her own bed, in the house she had lived in for years. Now she stood in an abandoned temple deep in the forest, with a king and his infant son, both hunted, both under her protection. The world had changed utterly in the space of a day, yet somehow it felt right, as if all the lonely years had been merely preparation for this moment, this purpose that was larger than herself. The lacrim stone against her chest pulsed gently, echoed by its twin worn by the king, a reminder of bonds formed long ago, now renewed in their unlikely alliance. Outside, the forest whispered secrets to the wind. Inside the temple walls, an alpha king, a seer, and a royal heir began creating something new from the ashes of betrayal. The first tentative threads of their shared destiny began to weave together, creating a tapestry whose pattern none of them could yet discern. The coming days would test them all, but for this moment, in this forgotten temple hidden from the world, they had found sanctuary. It would have to be enough. Days melted into weeks as the ancient temple became their sanctuary. What had begun as a desperate flight from death transformed into something unexpected, a life of sorts, cobbled together from necessity and growing bonds. Aria had created small chambers within the temple using salvaged blankets and vines woven into screens. Magnus had repaired the roof where rainwater had found entry, fashioning tools from branches and stone with the practiced hands of a man who valued survival skills as much as courtly ones. The temple grounds flourished under Aria's care. She cultivated herbs in a small garden hidden behind the stone structure, transplanting medicinal plants from the surrounding forest. Wild onions and mushrooms supplemented their meals, along with rabbits and fish that Magnus caught with traps of his own design. Leo thrived despite their circumstances. His first tooth had pushed through, causing nights of fussing that only Aria seemed able to soothe. He had grown plumper, stronger, his eyes more alert and focused with each passing day. When he smiled, a toothless, drooling grin that appeared with increasing frequency, something in Aria's chest tightened with an emotion she dared not name. On this particular evening, as autumn's chill crept through the forest, Magnus worked outside the temple entrance. Firelight spilled from within, illuminating his powerful frame as he whittled a small wooden toy for his son. Aria watched him from the doorway, Leo balanced on her hip. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly. How natural it felt, how far removed from the danger that still hunted them. "He'll be walking before we know it," Magnus said without looking up, somehow sensing her presence. The blood healing had created connections neither fully understood. Sometimes he knew her thoughts before she voiced them, other times she felt his emotions as clearly as her own. "Not for months yet," Aria replied, stepping closer. "But he's trying to roll over already." Magnus set aside his knife and wood, reaching up to take Leo from her arms. The baby cooed in delight, recognizing his father instantly. Even at this young age, the bond between them was palpable. "My son," Magnus murmured, lifting Leo above his head, eliciting squeals of joy. "Future king of Northaven." The words hung in the evening air, a reminder of the world beyond their forest sanctuary. A world where Garrick sat upon a stolen throne, where loyal subjects suffered under a usurper's rule, where Magnus's true identity as king remained a secret, kept by only a trusted few. Aria settled beside them on the stone step, drawing her shawl tighter against the autumn breeze. "Have your wounds healed completely?" Magnus nodded, lowering Leo to his lap. "Thanks to your care. I haven't felt this strong in years." He flexed his hand, studying it in the fading light. "The blood healing changed something in me. My senses are sharper, the wolf closer to the surface." Aria had noticed these changes herself. Magnus moved with a fluid grace that seemed more than human, his reflexes almost preternaturally quick. At night, she sometimes caught his eyes reflecting firelight, like a predator's. "And you?" he asked, turning those eyes toward her now. "Have you noticed differences?" She hesitated before answering. "Dreams. Visions more vivid than before. Sometimes I see through your eyes." A confession that would have seemed madness weeks ago now felt like simple truth between them. The lacrim grows warmer when you're near. The blue stones they both wore had become more than ornaments. Aria felt hers pulse in time with her heartbeat, resonating with its twin around Magnus's neck. Another connection, ancient, and poorly understood. "My grandmother told me stories," Magnus said, his voice taking on the cadence of memory, "of when seers and alphas ruled together, how their joined powers created a golden age for Northaven." He looked at her directly. "I never believed them, thought them children's tales like most do." "As did I," Aria admitted, "until I met you." Leo had fallen asleep in his father's arms, tiny hands curled into fists against Magnus's chest. The king looked down at his son with fierce tenderness. "He deserves to know that world," Magnus said softly, "not this one of betrayal and shadows." Aria reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing Magnus's arm in comfort. The contact sent a jolt through them both, that strange current that passed whenever they touched, growing stronger with each day. Neither acknowledged it aloud, though both felt its power. "He will," she promised. "You'll take back your throne, restore what was lost." Magnus looked at her, a question in his eyes that remained unspoken. Would she be there when that day came? Or would their paths diverge once safety was secured? The future stretched before them, clouded and uncertain. The moment broke as a night bird called from the forest depths. Magnus rose, careful not to disturb the sleeping Leo. "I should put him down for the night." Aria nodded, remaining on the step as Magnus carried his son inside. The temple had become home in ways her cabin never had, perhaps because for the first time in years she was not alone. Later that night, as moonlight spilled through the temple's high windows, Aria woke to Leo's soft crying. She rose from her pallet near the altar, moving instinctively toward the sound. Magnus was already there, lifting his son from the basket that served as his bed. "I've got him," the king whispered. "Go back to sleep." But Aria was already awake, and something about the tableau before her held her attention. Magnus, king of Northaven, heir to the ancient Alpha bloodline, pacing the stone floor with his infant son cradled against his bare chest. Moonlight silvered his skin, highlighting the scars of old battles and newer wounds. He hummed softly, an old melody that seemed to rise from some racial memory. "What song is that?" she asked. Magnus looked up, not surprised by her presence. "An old one from the mountains where my family began, about the moon and her love for the lone wolf." "It's beautiful." He smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. "I'll teach it to you someday." Someday. The word hung between them, laden with promise and uncertainty, as if they had a future beyond these strange suspended days in their stone sanctuary. Leo settled back to sleep, but neither adult felt ready to return to their beds. Instead, they sat side by side at the small table Aria had fashioned from fallen timber, a candle burning between them. "Why did you really come to my cabin that night?" Aria asked suddenly, the question that had lingered unspoken for weeks. "There must have been safer places, grand lords who would protect their king." Magnus was quiet for a long moment, studying the candle flame. When he answered, his voice held the weight of confession. "When I saw you at the festival, something connected. My stone grew warm." He touched the lacrim that hung around his neck, matching hers. "I knew we were meant to find each other." "For what purpose?" He smiled slightly. "That I don't yet know. But I trust the old magic that has guided my family for generations." Aria thought about arguing, about telling him she didn't believe in destiny or fate or old magic. But the words stuck in her throat because she did feel it too. This strange bond between them, the sense that their meeting was not by chance. "What happens when you're strong enough to leave?" she asked, voicing the fear that had grown larger each day. "Will you go back to the capital, take your army, fight Garrick?" "Yes," he said simply. "I must, for Leo's sake, for the kingdom." His eyes met hers across the table. "What happens next depends on you." "On me?" "On whether you'll come with us." His hand reached for hers, warm and calloused. "Stand with me, not behind me." Aria looked down at their joined hands. his so much larger than hers, yet holding hers as if it were something precious, something to be protected. "I don't know if I'm brave enough," she whispered. "You're the bravest person I know," Magnus replied without hesitation. "Taking in two strangers in the middle of the night, caring for a baby not your own, living alone all these years, facing the fear and hatred of people too small-minded to see your gift for what it is." When he put it that way, perhaps she was brave, but the thought of leaving her safe forest, of facing a world that had never been kind to her. "You don't have to decide now," Magnus said gently, as if reading her thoughts again. "But know this, whatever you choose, I am in your debt. My son and I both are." "I don't want your debt," Aria replied, surprising herself with the force of her words. "What do you want?" What did she want? No one had ever asked her that before. She'd spent her life surviving, not wanting. Her eyes moved instinctively to where Leo slept in his basket, peaceful and perfect in the candlelight. "I want him to grow up in a world where he isn't afraid of who he is," she said finally. "Where no one calls him monster or beast or witch for the gifts he was born with." Magnus's eyes shone in the dim light. "That is what I want too. And together perhaps we can build such a world." The word hung between them again, full of promise and possibility. His hand tightened around hers, and she didn't pull away. In that moment, in the ancient temple hidden at the edge of the forest, something shifted. A bond formed, not of duty or debt or even gratitude, but of understanding, of shared dreams, of hope. The three of them, a king without a throne, a seer without a people, and a baby too young to know the dangers that hunted him, had become something new, something that felt strangely like family. Morning brought discovery. While gathering herbs near the stream that ran behind the temple, Aria found footprints in the soft earth of the bank. Boot prints, deep and purposeful. Someone had been watching them. Heart racing, she hurried back to the temple, where Magnus practiced sword forms in the clearing. Leo sat nearby on a blanket, happily batting at the wooden toy his father had carved. "Someone's been here," Aria said without preamble, "near the stream." Magnus immediately sheathed his sword, moving to pick up Leo. "How many?" "I couldn't tell. At least one, wearing boots." The king's face hardened into the mask of a warrior. "Show me." Together they returned to the stream, Leo secured against Magnus's chest in his sling. Aria pointed out the tracks, impressed when Magnus knelt to examine them, despite the baby's weight. "One man," he confirmed. "Light, probably a scout rather than a full soldier. These are hours old." He looked up at her, his expression grave. "They're searching the deep forest now. We've run out of time." The words sent a chill through Aria, despite the morning sunlight. Their sanctuary had been discovered, or soon would be. They needed to move. "Where can we go?" she asked, scanning the forest as if enemies might materialize from the trees. Magnus rose, one hand protectively covering Leo's back. "Not where. What? It's time I stopped hiding and started fighting back." Back at the temple, Magnus outlined his plan. In the weeks of their seclusion, he had been sending messages through forest creatures, ravens and wolves that responded to his alpha call. Loyal lords had gathered forces in secret, preparing for the king's return. The time had come to join them. "The northern mountains," he explained, tracing the route on a crude map scratched into bark. "Lord Blackwood maintains a stronghold there, far from Garrick's influence. He has given shelter to those still loyal to me." "It's at least a week's journey," Aria said, calculating the distance. "Through lands Garrick controls." "Not if we travel as wolves travel," Magnus replied, his eyes taking on that silvery quality that signaled his alpha nature rising to the surface. "There are paths through these forests known only to my kind, ways that men on horses cannot follow." "You can maintain wolf form that long?" Aria asked, surprised. She had seen him shift only briefly during their time together, usually to hunt. "I can now." Something in his voice made her look closer at him. "The blood healing changed more than you know. My strength has returned tenfold. The alpha in me has awakened fully." Aria considered this. "And Leo? He's too young to travel such distances, especially if we must move quickly. Magnus's face softened as he looked at his son. That is why I must go alone, at least at first. The words struck Aria like a physical blow, though she had suspected this might be his solution. Alone? I can travel faster, avoiding patrols more easily. Once I reach Blackwood's stronghold, I'll send trusted men to escort you and Leo safely there. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I would not leave you if there were any other way. Aria knew he spoke sense, yet something in her rebelled against the plan. When? Tonight, under cover of darkness. So soon. She nodded, unable to trust her voice with further words. Magnus seemed about to speak again when Leo let out a happy gurgle, breaking the tension. Both adults turned to where he played on his blanket, oblivious to the decisions being made that would shape his future. He'll need milk, Aria said practically, falling back on the concrete details of care rather than confronting the emotions swirling within her. I've been drying herbs that stimulate milk production in goats. You should take some for the journey. Aria. Magnus's hand caught her arm as she turned away. This isn't forever. I will return for you both. She met his gaze then, allowing him to see the fear and uncertainty she usually kept hidden. You don't know that. Garrick's men are everywhere. His dark magic grows stronger by the day. I know this. Magnus's hand moved from her arm to her face, cupping her cheek with unexpected gentleness from a warrior king. But I also know that Leo needs a kingdom to inherit, not a life of running and hiding. And for that, I must reclaim what is rightfully his. Aria leaned into his touch despite herself. Be careful, she whispered. He needs his father. The unspoken words hung between them. And I need you. Neither said it aloud, but both felt the truth of it in the connection that had grown between them. The day passed too quickly. Aria prepared provisions, sewing an extra pocket inside Magnus's cloak for the lacrim stone he always wore. Magnus sharpened his sword, tested his bow, made ready for war. Leo sensed the tension, becoming clingy and fretful, crying when either adult put him down. As sunset painted the forest in gold and crimson, Magnus donned his travel cloak, securing his weapons with practiced efficiency. Aria watched him, memorizing the planes of his face, the way firelight caught in his dark hair. She had known him only weeks, yet the thought of his absence carved a hollow space within her chest. Take this, Magnus said, pressing something into her hand. A small wooden box, intricately carved with the symbols of his house. For Leo, when he's older. If I... Don't, Aria cut him off, closing her fingers around the box. Don't speak of not returning. Magnus nodded, respecting her need for hope, however fragile. He knelt before Leo, who sat on their shared blanket, eyes wide and solemn, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Grow strong, my little warrior, he whispered, pressing his lips to his son's forehead. Know that your father loves you more than his own life. When he stood and turned to Aria, his eyes shone with unshed tears. I'm not good with goodbyes, he admitted, his voice rough. Then don't say goodbye, she told him, her own vision blurring. Say until we meet again. A smile touched his lips, transforming his face from stern king to the man she had come to know in their weeks of exile. Until we meet again, my seer. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. Before she could catch her breath, his lips found hers in a kiss that contained everything they hadn't said, fear and hope and longing and promises too big for words. Then he was gone, slipping into the gathering darkness like a shadow. Aria stood at the temple entrance long after she could no longer see him, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Owls called to one another, small creatures rustled in the underbrush, leaves whispered secrets in the gentle breeze. Somewhere out there, Magnus moved through the darkness, heading toward danger while she remained behind with his son. The thought struck her with sudden force. His son, the heir to Northaven. Now her responsibility alone until Magnus returned, if he returned. The weight of that trust settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. When the chill finally drove her back inside, Leo was already asleep, one small fist curled beside his face. Aria added wood to their fire, watching the flames leap and dance. Her eyes fell on the wooden box Magnus had left. It was small, just large enough to fit in her palm, carved with symbols of the royal house, a wolf and crown intertwined. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside lay a ring on a silver chain, heavy gold, set with a deep blue stone that matched their lacrim. Clearly royal, the kind of ring a king would wear or give to someone of great importance. Beneath it, a small piece of parchment was folded. In a strong hand, 5 words were written: "Wait for me. I will return." Fresh tears filled Aria's eyes as she slipped the chain over her head, letting the ring rest beside her lacrim stone. "I'll wait," she whispered to the empty air. "We both will." Days passed. Aria marked them with small cuts on a stick. 5 days, 10, 15. Leo grew more each day, learning to roll over on his own, grabbing at objects with increasing coordination. She told him stories about his father, how brave he was, how kind, how he would come back to them. She told herself the same stories, especially at night when the darkness felt too heavy and the silence too loud. As the days turned to weeks, Aria ventured farther from the temple, gathering food, checking for signs of soldiers. The forest became her ally, hiding them, feeding them, keeping them safe. She taught Leo the names of birds and trees, sang him the songs her grandmother had taught her, watched as his personality emerged, curious, determined, quick to laugh. One morning, about a month after Magnus left, Aria woke to Leo's happy babbling. He had learned to scoot himself across the floor by pushing with his legs, not quite crawling, but close. She watched with pride as he made his way toward a sunbeam on the temple floor. The sunlight caught on something around his neck, a tiny version of the lacrim stone his father and Aria wore, hanging on a cord she had woven from strong vines. Magnus had left it for his son, along with a letter Aria kept safe until the boy was old enough to read. "Your papa is very clever," she told Leo as she scooped him up, leaving us pieces of himself to hold on to. The baby grabbed at her face, laughing. In these weeks, she had given him a name in her heart, not a royal name that might put him in danger if overheard, but a simple name from an old story her grandmother used to tell, a name that meant light in darkness. After breakfast, Aria wrapped Leo snugly against her chest and walked to the small stream near the temple. The day was unseasonably warm, the forest peaceful. Birds sang in the trees above them, and butterflies danced over wildflowers that bloomed along the path. At the stream, she sat on a sun-warmed rock and dipped her feet in the cool water. Leo watched the ripples with wide, wondering eyes. "See the fish?" Aria pointed to the tiny silver shapes darting beneath the surface. "When you're bigger, your papa will teach you to catch them with your hands. He told me he learned when he was just a little boy, not much bigger than you are now." Leo kicked his feet in excitement, making her laugh. These were the moments that made the waiting bearable, when she could see the future stretching out before them, full of possibilities. But as they sat by the stream, a sound broke the forest peace, the distant whinny of a horse. Aria froze, straining her ears. There it was again, along with the jingle of metal, bridles or armor. Heart pounding, Aria gathered Leo and hurried back toward the temple. She moved as Magnus had taught her, stepping carefully to avoid making noise, staying low and in the shadows. From the safety of the temple entrance, she peered out at the forest. Nothing moved among the trees, but she could still feel it. They were no longer alone. That night, Aria didn't sleep. She sat with Magnus's knife in her hand, Leo cradled against her side. Every sound made her tense, ready to run or fight. When dawn came, she made a decision. They couldn't stay here, not if soldiers were nearby. They needed to move deeper into the forest, find somewhere even more hidden. She packed quickly, taking only what they needed: food, blankets, the wooden box with Magnus's letter to his son inside. Leo watched her with solemn eyes, as if he understood that things were changing again. "It's going to be okay," Aria told him, though her voice shook. "I promised your papa I'd keep you safe, and I will." As the sun climbed higher, Aria strapped Leo to her back and picked up their small pack of supplies. At the temple entrance, she looked back at the place that had been their home for these weeks, where she had first begun to hope for a future she never thought she could have. "We'll come back," she whispered, "when it's safe, when your papa returns for us." With those words, she stepped into the forest, away from the temple, away from the sounds of horses and men, deeper into the wild where no one would find them, where they would wait, however long it took, for Magnus to return. The blue stone around her neck still glowed warm against her skin. The ring he'd left still hung beside it. And Leo, his son, who felt like her son too now, still needed her to be strong. So Aria walked on, one foot in front of the other, into the unknown, carrying the most precious thing the king could have entrusted to her, carrying hope. 3 months passed like water flowing in a stream. Summer faded into fall. The leaves turned bright red and gold, then drifted to the ground in crisp piles. The air grew cooler each morning. Leo and Aria found a new home deep in the forest, a cave hidden behind a waterfall. It was cold, but safe. No one could find them here. Leo had changed remarkably in these months. He crawled now, fast as a little rabbit, getting into everything. His first tooth had pushed through his gum, making him fussy for days. He said, "Mama," when he saw Aria, though she had tried to teach him to say Papa too. She wanted him to know his father when Magnus returned. If he returned. No, Aria couldn't think like that. Magnus would come back. The lock rim around her neck still glowed warm. The ring he left her still hung beside it. These things told her he lived. On this morning, Leo played with smooth stones Aria had collected from the stream behind their waterfall. He banged them together, laughing at the sound. His cheeks were round and pink, his eyes bright with intelligence. He looked more like his father each day. "Hungry, little one?" Aria asked, reaching for the rabbit stew bubbling over their small fire. Leo banged his stones harder, which she took as a yes. As she fed him, Aria talked about Magnus as she did every day. "Your papa is tall and strong," she told him as the spoon moved from bowl to eager mouth. "His eyes are blue like yours. His laugh is deep like thunder, but warm like sunshine. He loves you more than anything in the world." Leo watched her face as she spoke, as if he understood every word. Perhaps he did. There was magic in his blood after all, both alpha and seer. After breakfast, Aria wrapped Leo warmly against the fall chill and secured him in the carrying sling on her back. They needed more food. Winter was coming, and they must be ready. The forest had been kind to them these past months. It had shown her where berries grew, where nuts fell from trees, which plants were good to eat, and which would make you sick. Today, she searched for the fat roots that grew near the old oak tree a short walk from their cave. They tasted like sweet potatoes when roasted in the fire. As she dug in the soft earth, Leo cooed and babbled on her back. Birds sang in the trees above them. The wind whispered through leaves still clinging to branches. All seemed peaceful. That's when she heard it. A twig snapping. Someone was walking in the forest. Not an animal. A person. Aria froze, her hands full of dirt and roots. Leo sensed her fear and went quiet. Another snap. Closer now. Then voices. Men's voices, rough and low. "The tracks lead this way," one said. "Are you sure it's her?" asked another. The description matches. Woman alone with a baby, living wild in the forest. Aria's heart pounded so hard she thought it might jump from her chest. How had they found them? They had been so careful. She set down the roots and wiped her dirty hands on her skirt. Moving slowly, deliberately, she backed away from the voices, deeper into the trees. Leo remained silent, as if he knew they were in danger. When she was far enough away that she thought they wouldn't hear her, Aria turned and hurried toward their hidden cave. Her feet knew the path, even when her eyes could barely see through tears of fear. At the cave, she quickly gathered their few important things: Magnus's wooden box with his letter inside, the blue stones, his knife, a blanket for Leo. She wrapped them in a bundle and tied it to her waist. "We have to leave," she whispered to Leo, who watched her with solemn eyes. "The bad men are coming." But where could they go? Winter approached. The forest would soon be covered in snow. They needed shelter, food, warmth. They couldn't just wander without a plan. An idea came to her, sudden as lightning. The old woman who lived at the edge of the next valley. Her grandmother had taken her there once when she was small. The woman was a healer like Aria. She might help them, give them shelter until Magnus returned. Decision made, Aria secured Leo more tightly to her back and slipped out of the cave. The waterfall hid them as they passed behind it, the cold spray making Leo whimper softly. Aria hushed him gently, promising warmth soon. They traveled all day, keeping to the deepest parts of the forest where men rarely ventured. Aria's legs ached, her back hurt from carrying Leo, but fear kept her moving forward. When night fell, she found a hollow tree to shelter in. Leo and Aria curled together for warmth, neither sleeping much. At first light, they moved on. By midday, they reached the edge of the old woman's valley. Aria could see smoke rising from a small house near the tree line. Hope lifted her tired spirits. Maybe they would be safe there. As they approached, Aria saw it was just as she remembered. A small wooden house with a thatched roof, a garden full of herbs and vegetables, chickens pecking in the yard. It looked peaceful, normal, safe. She knocked on the door, suddenly aware of how she must look. Dirty, wild-haired, thin from months in the forest. Leo peered over her shoulder, curious about this new place. The door opened. The old woman stood there, her face lined with years, but her eyes sharp and clear. She looked at Aria, then at Leo, and her eyes widened in recognition. "You're the forest witch," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Aria answered. "I need help. We need shelter, just for a while." The old woman studied them for a long moment, then stepped back. "Come in, child. You look half frozen." Inside, her house was warm and smelled of herbs and fresh bread. Leo made happy sounds, reaching for the bright objects hanging from the ceiling. Dried flowers, bundles of herbs, small, shiny things that caught the light. The old woman, who introduced herself as Willow, gave them food. Warm bread, cheese, hot tea. She didn't ask questions. Not yet. She just let them eat, watching with those sharp eyes that seemed to see more than what was on the surface. When their stomachs were full and Leo played happily with a wooden spoon, Willow sat across from them at her table. "Now," she said, "tell me why you're running." Aria didn't know why, but she trusted this woman. So she told her everything. Well, almost everything. She spoke of Magnus, calling him simply my friend rather than revealing his identity as king. His wounded arrival at her door, baby Leo, their months in hiding, the blue stones, the men searching for them. The only thing she kept to herself was Magnus's true identity. When she finished, Willow was quiet for a long time. "You've carried a heavy burden," she finally said. "You and the little one can stay here. Winter is no time for a baby to be living in a cave." Relief washed over Aria like a warm bath. "Thank you," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Don't thank me yet," Willow warned. "This valley isn't as remote as it once was. People come through now, traders, travelers. If someone is looking for you, they may find you here too." "We'll be careful," Aria promised. "We won't leave the house." Willow nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. "Rest now. We'll talk more later." That night, Leo and Aria slept on a pallet near the fire. For the first time in months, Aria slept deeply, without fear. Willow's house felt safe, protected somehow. Days passed peacefully. Willow taught Aria new healing herbs she didn't know before. Aria helped in the garden, pulling the last vegetables before winter killed them. Leo thrived with regular meals and warmth. His second tooth came in, and he learned to pull himself up to stand, holding onto chairs and table legs. But peace never lasts. One cold morning, as Aria helped Willow prepare breakfast and Leo played on the floor, a knock came at the door. The women froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Leo, unaware of the sudden tension, kept babbling happily. "Hide. Willow whispered, pointing to the small root cellar beneath a trap door in the floor. Aria scooped up Leo and quickly climbed down the ladder. Willow closed the door above them, leaving them in dim light that filtered through cracks in the wood. From their hiding place, Aria heard Willow open her front door. Men's voices drifted down to them, hard and demanding. "We're looking for a woman and a child," one said. "We have word she might be in this area." "I live alone," Willow replied, her voice steady despite her age. "Mind if we look around?" another man asked, though it didn't sound like a question. "I do mind," Willow said firmly. "I'm an old woman who values her privacy." "This isn't a social call, grandmother." The first voice grew harder. "We have orders from Lord Garrick himself. The woman we seek is harboring the traitor king's heir, a matter of state security." Aria's blood turned to ice. They knew who Leo was. Garrick wanted Magnus's son, the rightful heir to the throne. "I told you, I live alone," Willow repeated. "Then you won't mind if we search your house," the man said. Heavy boots sounded on the wooden floor above them. Leo, sensing Aria's fear, began to whimper. She pressed him close, trying to quiet him, her heart pounding so loud she was sure they could hear it. The men moved around the small house, opening cupboards, looking behind curtains. Their boots stopped directly above the trap door. "What's this?" one asked. "My root cellar," Willow answered calmly, "where I store vegetables for winter." "Open it," the man commanded. Aria heard the scrape of the trapdoor. Light flooded their hiding place. She looked up into the faces of 3 men wearing the Royal Guard's uniform, swords at their sides. "Well, well," one said, smiling without warmth. "Look what we found." "Leave her alone," Willow cried. "She's done nothing wrong." "Harboring the enemy of the crown is treason," the guard said coldly. "Both of you will answer for it." "The child is innocent," Aria protested as they dragged them from the cellar. "He's just a baby." "The child is heir to a traitor," the guard said. "Lord Garrick has ordered all threats to his rule eliminated." Fear unlike anything Aria had ever known gripped her. They meant to kill Leo, Magnus's son, the little one she had cared for all these months, who called her Mama and laughed when she tickled his belly. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "You can't have him." The guards laughed. "You don't have a choice, witch." Something shifted inside Aria. A strength she didn't know she had rose up like a wave. The lacrum at her neck grew hot against her skin. Magnus's ring beside it pulsed with power. "There's always a choice," she said, and she felt different somehow, taller, stronger, her voice ringing with authority she had never felt before. She thought of Magnus, how his voice changed when he commanded the soldiers who came to her house. The voice, he called it, a gift of the Alpha bloodline. She didn't have that gift, but she had her own. Aria looked directly into the eyes of the lead guard. "You don't want to take this child," she told him, pushing all her will into the words. "You came here looking for a woman with dark hair, not light like mine. Her baby had brown eyes, not blue. We're not who you seek." The guard's eyes went slightly unfocused. "You're not who we seek," he repeated slowly. The other guards looked confused. "Sir," one said, "she matches the description exactly." "No," the lead guard said, shaking his head. "Her hair is wrong. The baby's eyes are wrong. It's not them." Aria kept her eyes locked on his. "You'll go back to Lord Garrick and tell him you found nothing in this valley. No woman, no baby, just an old healer who lives alone." "We found nothing," the guard agreed, his voice flat. "Just an old woman alone." The other guards looked at each other, clearly confused, but they didn't argue with their leader. "You should leave now," Aria continued, her voice strangely calm. "Return to the capital before the winter storms make travel impossible." "Yes," the lead guard said, already turning toward the door. "We should go now." When the door closed behind them, Willow stared at Aria with wide eyes. "What did you do?" she asked in amazement. Aria sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Leo crawled into her lap, patting her face with his small hands. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just knew I couldn't let them take him." Willow sat across from her, her face serious. "That was old magic. the kind few remember, the kind that was thought lost when the seers were hunted to extinction. Seers. The word Magnus had used, saying she was one. Those who could see what others couldn't, who could bend truth and perception. Willow reached out to touch the lock rim at Aria's neck. "This is a seer stone. Where did you get it?" "It was given to me," Aria said. "And this one was my friend's." She showed Willow the matching blue stone and the ring on its chain. The old woman's eyes widened. "Your friend gave you his royal seal? The one passed down through generations?" Aria nodded, not sure why it mattered. "Child," Willow said softly, "do you know what that means?" "That he trusts me to care for his son?" "It means far more than that." She shook her head in wonder. "But now is not the time. Those men may have left, but they'll be back when your magic wears off. And next time they'll bring more men, ones not so easily swayed." "What do we do?" Aria asked, holding Leo close. "You must leave," Willow said firmly. "Tonight, go north to the mountains. There are caves there, deep ones where no one will find you." She began gathering supplies, food, blankets, a water skin. "Take these. I'll give you what I can." "But winter in a cave is better than death at a usurper's hand," Willow cut her off. "The little one is the true heir. If they find him, they will kill him, and you with him." Aria knew she was right. The peaceful days in Willow's warm house were over. They must run again. But this time, she wasn't just running out of fear. She was running to protect Leo. Her baby now in all the ways that mattered. "I'll be ready at nightfall," she told Willow, a new determination filling her. The old woman nodded approvingly. "You've found your strength," she said. "The king chose well when he left his son in your care." As Aria prepared for their journey, packing food and blankets, she thought about what had just happened. The power she had felt, the way the guard's eyes had changed, the way he believed what she told him, even though it wasn't true. Was this what Magnus meant when he said she was a seer? Was this why people feared her mother and her grandmother? Leo played with the lock rim around his neck, unaware of the danger or the power in his blood and hers. But Aria knew now what she hadn't fully understood before. Magnus hadn't just left her with his son. He had left her with his heir, the future king, and she wouldn't let anyone take that future away. As night fell, she strapped Leo to her chest, close against her heart. Willow gave them a pack of food and a map drawn on a piece of bark. "Follow the North Star," she instructed. "Don't stop until you reach the White Cliffs. You'll find the caves there." Aria hugged the old woman who had helped them when they needed it most. "Thank you." "Go with the old gods, child," Willow whispered. "They've marked you for great things, you and the little one both." With those words ringing in her ears, Aria stepped out into the cold night. Leo snuggled against her, trusting her to keep him safe. And she would. No matter what came, she would protect him. Magnus's son, her son now, her family. Under a sky bright with stars, they set off toward the mountains, and whatever future awaited them there. Aria didn't know if Magnus would find them. She didn't know if they would survive the winter. But she knew one thing for certain. No one would take Leo from her, not while she had breath in her body. The lockrim stones around their necks glowed softly in the darkness, lighting their way forward. The mountain caves became their home as winter wrapped the world in snow and ice. Days blended together in a haze of cold and hunger. Aria told Leo stories to keep them both from going crazy in the endless dark. She sang songs her grandmother had taught her. She played games with her fingers to make him laugh. Food grew scarce. Willow's supplies ran low. Some days Aria went hungry so Leo could eat. He grew anyway, strong and clever. He took his first steps in their cave, wobbling across the stone floor into Aria's waiting arms. His first real word beyond mama was cold, which made her laugh even as her heart ached. They survived on hope and the warmth of the lockrim stones that never stopped glowing. Aria told herself every day that Magnus would come, that he hadn't forgotten them, that he was fighting his way back even now. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow in patches, they ventured out more often. Leo, no longer really a baby but a toddler now, squealed with joy at the sight of green things growing, at birds singing in the trees, at the feel of warm sun on his face. One bright morning, as they sat by a small stream eating the first berries of the season, Aria heard it, the sound of horses moving through the forest below their cave. She grabbed Leo and hurried back to their hiding place, heart pounding in fear. "Quiet now," she whispered, as she tucked him into the deepest part of the cave. "Remember our hiding game?" Leo nodded, eyes wide but trusting. After so many close calls this winter, he knew the drill. "Stay quiet. Don't move. Wait for Mama to come back." Aria kissed his forehead and pressed Magnus's knife into his small hand. "Hold this for me. I'll be right back." Outside, she climbed to a high rock where she could see the forest below. A group of riders moved through the trees, at least 20 of them. Aria's heart sank. So many, too many to fight or trick with her growing but still limited powers. But as she watched, something strange happened. The riders stopped and made camp right there in the open. They didn't spread out to search. They didn't move toward the caves. They just waited. And then she saw him, standing apart from the others, looking up toward the mountains as if he could feel her watching. Tall and strong, his dark hair longer now, his face leaner, but still the same. Magnus, her king. Aria nearly fell off her perch. He was alive. He was here. After all these months of waiting, of hoping, of keeping his son safe, he had come back for them. Part of her wanted to rush down the mountain right now, but caution held her back. What if it was a trap? What if it wasn't really him, but someone made to look like him? As if sensing her doubt, Magnus reached into his shirt and pulled out something that caught the sunlight, his lacrim stone. It glowed bright as a star, pulsing with light. The stone around Aria's neck answered, growing warm and bright against her skin. Leo's, too, back in the cave, must be glowing. It was him. It was really him. Aria scrambled down from her perch and raced back to the cave. Leo sat just where she had left him, the knife clutched in his small fist. "We need to go," she told him, gathering their few belongings. The wooden box with Magnus's letter, a blanket, the small wooden toys his father had carved that she had kept safe all these months. "Bad men?" Leo asked, his face serious beyond his years. "No, little one," Aria said, her voice breaking with joy. "Your papa has come back for us." His eyes grew huge. "Papa? My papa?" "Yes, my brave boy, your papa." He leaped into her arms, nearly knocking her over with his excitement. "See Papa now?" "Yes, we'll see Papa now." Aria strapped their pack to her back and lifted Leo into her arms. He was heavy now, not the tiny bundle Magnus had first handed her what felt like a lifetime ago. But she would have carried him to the end of the world if she had to. They made their way down the mountain carefully. Leo chattered nonstop, asking questions about his papa that Aria tried her best to answer. "Is he big?" "Yes, very big." "Is he nice?" "Yes, very nice." "Will he like me?" "Oh, yes, he loves you more than anything." As they got closer to the camp, Aria slowed down, still cautious despite the pull of the lacrim stones drawing them together. She set Leo on his feet, but kept hold of his hand. "Stay close to me," she told him. "No running ahead." They approached the edge of the camp. Guards saw them and raised the alarm. Men grabbed swords, forming a line between them and the rest of the camp. "State your business," one called out, his voice hard. Before Aria could answer, another voice rang out, one that made her heart leap in her chest. "Stand down." The men parted like water, and there he was, running toward them, his face a mix of hope and disbelief. Leo saw him and somehow knew, even though it had been so long. "Papa!" he shouted, breaking free of Aria's hand to run to his father on sturdy little legs. Magnus fell to his knees, catching his son in his arms, lifting him high in the air before hugging him close. "My boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My brave, strong boy." Aria stood frozen, tears running down her face at the sight of them together at last. Magnus looked up at her over Leo's dark head, his eyes full of things she was afraid to name. "You kept him safe," he said, his voice breaking. "You kept your promise." "I did," was all she managed to say through her tears. Magnus stood, still holding Leo, and closed the distance between them. His free hand reached out to touch her face, as if making sure she was real. "I never stopped looking," he said. "Every day I searched for signs of you both. The stone led me here finally." "I never stopped waiting," she told him. "I knew you'd come." His eyes dropped to the chains around her neck, the lacrum stone and his ring still hanging side by side. "You wore it every day." Something flashed in his eyes. Hope, hunger, home. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to back away, but she didn't. His lips found hers, gentle at first, then with a need that made her knees weak. Leo, caught between them, giggled and patted both their cheeks. When they broke apart, Magnus pressed his forehead to hers. "I have so much to tell you," he said. "So much has happened." "Tell me everything," Aria replied. He took her hand and led her into the camp. His men bowed as they passed, not just to him, but to her as well, which felt strange after so long being hunted. In his tent, as Leo played with new toys brought by his father's men, Magnus told his story, how he had gathered loyal lords to his cause, how they had fought battle after battle against Garrick's forces, how just a month ago they had taken back the capital city. "Garrick is dead," he said, his voice flat. "He refused to surrender. I didn't want more bloodshed, but he gave me no choice." "I'm sorry," Aria said, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. Garrick would have killed his own nephew, a child, to keep the throne. "There's more," Magnus continued, his face growing serious. "Things I learned while in the capital, things about you, about us, that explain so much." "What things?" Aria asked, her pulse quickening. Magnus took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "The seers weren't just advisors to the Alpha Kings of old. They were our mates, our equals in power, our partners in ruling. The lacrum stones were created to help each king find his true mate, the one seer whose gifts would complement his own." Aria stared at him, trying to understand. "But that would mean that we were always meant to find each other," he finished for her. "That the connection we felt from the first wasn't by chance." "But we never met before the festival," Aria said, confused. "I would remember." Magnus's face darkened. "That's the worst part. We did meet years ago, but Garrick made sure we both forgot." "How is that possible?" "There are herbs, potions, that can make a person forget," Magnus explained, anger evident in his voice. "Garrick found the last known supply and used it on both of us. Then he spread rumors that I'd fathered a child with a serving girl while drunk." Leo looked up at the sound of his father's angry voice, his small face worried. Magnus immediately softened, reaching out to ruffle his son's dark hair. "It's all right, little warrior. Papa's not angry at you." When Leo went back to his toys, Magnus continued, his voice lower, "Garrick knew what would happen if a true Alpha King found his seer mate. Our combined power would be too great for anyone to challenge. So he kept us apart, kept me drugged and controlled. When I started to wake up, to remember glimpses of the truth, he tried to kill me." Aria's head spun with this new knowledge. "So Leo is—" "Yours as much as mine," Magnus said, taking her hand. "Born of a union, Garrick tried to erase from our memories. But some bonds can't be broken, not even by dark magic." Aria looked at Leo playing happily on the floor of the tent. Her child, her son. The missing piece clicked into place, and suddenly she understood why she had felt such a deep connection to him from the first moment, why she would die to protect him. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I didn't know," Magnus said simply. "Not until I found my grandmother's private journals in the palace. She knew what Garrick had done, but she was too old and sick to stop him. She left the truth for me to find if I ever returned." Leo crawled into Aria's lap, tired of his toys. He snuggled against her, then reached for his father's hand. The three of them, connected again after so long apart. "What happens now?" Aria asked, afraid to hope for too much. Magnus's eyes met hers, clear and determined. "Now we go home," To our palace, our kingdom, together. His hand touched her cheek gently. If you'll have me, that is. I won't force you to be my queen if it's not what you want. Aria thought about all they had been through. The king appearing at her door, wounded and desperate. The months caring for his son, their son. The long separation, the dangers they had faced. She thought about the connection between them, the one that had only grown stronger with time and distance. I want to be where you and our son are, she told him, whether that's a palace or a cave or anywhere in between. Magnus's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds after a long storm. Then let's go home, my queen. Our people are waiting to meet the woman who kept their future king safe. He paused, his eyes growing serious again. The woman who will stand beside me as we build a new world, one where no one with gifts like ours will ever be feared or hated again. He leaned in to kiss her, and this time Aria met him halfway. Leo giggling between them, their lacrim stones glowing warm against their skin, binding them together just as they were always meant to be. 5 years passed like a dream. Aria stood on the balcony of the tallest tower in the royal palace of Northaven, watching the sun rise over the kingdom. The morning light turned everything to gold, the gardens below, the city beyond the palace walls, the mountains in the distance where they had once hidden in caves. So much had changed since that day in the forest when Magnus had found them again. The frightened woman who once hid from village whispers now stood proud as queen. The crown still felt heavy sometimes, but Aria had learned to carry it with grace. Her gift, once feared, was now honored. People came from far away to seek her sight, her wisdom, her healing knowledge. And Leo, now Prince Leopold officially, though Aria still called him her little one in private, had grown into a boy of 6, tall for his age with his father's dark hair and Aria's green eyes. He ran through the palace halls with the confidence of someone who had never known fear or rejection. He was loved by all who met him, from the highest lords to the kitchen maids who slipped him extra sweets when they thought she wasn't looking. Today was special, the spring gathering, when people from all corners of Northaven came to the palace. Not just nobles and knights, but ordinary folk too. And most importantly, those with gifts like hers and Magnus's. The children born with the sight, the men and women who could speak to animals or make plants grow with the touch of their hands, the old ones who remembered the ancient ways, the magic that had flowed through the land before fear drove it into hiding. 5 years ago, such a gathering would have been impossible. Those with gifts kept them hidden, afraid of being called monsters or witches. But Magnus had kept his promise. When he reclaimed his throne, the first law he changed was the one that made magic a crime. Now those with gifts were protected, respected, even sought after for the help they could provide. Aria heard small footsteps behind her and turned to find Leo still in his nightclothes, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Mama, are you ready?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Papa said to come find you. The people are arriving." Aria smiled and knelt to straighten his rumpled shirt. "I'm ready, little prince, but you need proper clothes for such an important day." Leo wrinkled his nose. "Do I have to wear the stiff coat with the buttons?" "Yes, you do," Aria laughed, taking his hand to lead him back inside. "A prince must look like a prince, especially today." In their royal chambers, servants had laid out their clothes for the day. Aria's dress was deep blue, like the lacrim stone she still wore around her neck. Leo's outfit matched his father's, dark blue with silver trim, the colors of House Bloodcrest. As her maids helped her dress and arrange her hair, Aria thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the lonely cottage at the edge of the forest to this grand palace, from an outcast to a queen, from a woman afraid of her own power to one who taught others to embrace theirs. "You're quiet this morning, Your Majesty," said her chief maid, an older woman named Elise, who had served Aria since she first came to the palace. "Just thinking," Aria told her, "about how much has changed." Elise smiled, pinning the last silver ornament in her hair. "For the better, I'd say. The kingdom hasn't been this peaceful in generations." She was right. Under Magnus's rule, with Aria's help beside him, Northaven had flourished. The harvests were good. Trade flowed freely. People no longer looked over their shoulders in fear. When she was ready, Aria and Leo made their way to the great hall. The palace hummed with activity, servants rushing about, guards standing at attention, musicians tuning their instruments. Leo skipped beside her, unable to contain his excitement. "Will Tomas be here?" he asked, speaking of his favorite playmate, the son of Lord Blackwood, the northern lord who had sheltered Magnus during the war against Garrick. "Yes, all the noble families will attend," Aria assured him, "and many others too." At the entrance to the hall, Magnus waited for them. 5 years as king had added a few silver threads to his dark hair, a few lines around his eyes, but they only made him more handsome to Aria. His face lit up when he saw them approach. "My 2 treasures," he said, bending to scoop Leo into his arms. "Ready to greet our guests?" Leo nodded eagerly. "I practiced my bow all week." Magnus laughed, setting him down. "I'm sure you'll impress everyone." Then he turned to Aria, his eyes softening. "And you, my queen, will outshine the sun itself." He offered her his arm, and together, with Leo walking proudly ahead, they entered the great hall. The room fell silent as they appeared. Hundreds of faces turned toward them, noble lords and ladies in fine clothes, common folk in their best but simpler garments, children with wide, wondering eyes, and scattered throughout, men and women wearing blue stones around their necks, the mark of those with gifts who now served as advisors in every part of the kingdom. Magnus stepped forward to address the crowd. "Welcome, all of you, to the 5th annual spring gathering. 5 years ago, when we first opened our doors to all people of this land, I promised a new beginning, a kingdom where strength and kindness would rule together, where gifts once hidden would be celebrated, where no child would grow up in fear of who they are." The hall erupted in cheers. Leo beamed up at his father with pride. When the noise died down, Magnus continued, "None of this would have been possible without my queen, who taught me what true strength looks like, who kept our sons safe when all seemed lost, who showed me that the mightiest power comes not from force, but from love." He turned to Aria, his eyes shining with the same love he spoke of. The crowd cheered again, and Aria felt her cheeks warm with a blush. Even after 5 years, she still wasn't entirely comfortable with the adoration of the people. The formal part of the gathering gave way to celebration. Music played, people danced, tables groaned under the weight of food and drink. Aria and Magnus moved among their guests, greeting old friends, meeting new ones, listening to concerns, celebrating victories. Late in the afternoon, a small girl approached Aria, no more than 7 years old. She carried a single white flower, which she held out with a trembling hand. "For you, Queen Aria," she whispered, "because you're like me." Aria knelt to the child's level, taking the flower with a smile. "And how am I like you, little one?" The girl glanced at her mother, who gave an encouraging nod. "I see things too," she said very quietly. "Things that haven't happened yet. Things that glow." She hesitated, then added, "Mama says I don't have to be scared anymore because of you." Something swelled in Aria's chest. Joy and fierce pride. This was why they had fought so hard. This was what made the crown's weight worth bearing. "Your mama is right," Aria told her. "Your gift is beautiful, not scary. And one day, if you want, you can come live at the palace and learn how to use it to help others." The girl's eyes grew wide as moons. "Really?" "Really, I promise. We need bright young seers like you." The girl's mother thanked Aria with tears in her eyes before leading her daughter away. Aria watched them go, her heart full. One child who wouldn't grow up as she had, isolated, frightened, believing herself a monster. Later, as the sun began to set, Magnus found Aria in a quiet corner of the garden. Leo played nearby with other children, their laughter ringing through the evening air. "Happy?" Magnus asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Aria told him, leaning into his strength. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," he said, watching Leo race another boy around a fountain. that we found each other against all odds, that we built this life from the ruins Garrick left. The lacrim stones led us together, Aria reminded him, touching the blue gem that still hung around her neck, just as they were meant to. Magnus turned her to face him, his expression serious. It wasn't just the stones, it was you, your courage, your heart. The woman who took in a wounded stranger and his son, who kept that son safe through winter and danger, who never stopped believing I would return. The woman who was once afraid of her own shadow, Aria said with a small smile. The woman who found her strength, he corrected gently, who turned what others called a curse into a blessing for an entire kingdom. Over his shoulder, Aria saw Leo running toward them, his face alight with joy. Behind him came other children, some with lacrim stones of their own, none of them afraid, none of them alone. This was their legacy, Aria realized. Not just the crown, not just the kingdom, but this new world they had built together. A world where being different wasn't something to fear, but something to celebrate. Where a village outcast could become a beloved queen. Where the very thing that had once made her hide in shadows now let her stand tall in the light. Magnus saw where she was looking and turned to watch the children too. Leo reached them, throwing himself into his father's arms with complete trust and love. "Papa, Mama, come see what Leia can do. She can make water dance in the air." Magnus laughed. "Lead the way, little warrior." As they followed their son, hand in hand, Aria thought about the long, strange path that had brought them here. From a frightened girl to a confident queen. From a lone wolf to the leader of a pack. From strangers thrown together by fate to a family bound by love. The lacrim stones at their throats pulsed in gentle unison, the blue light a reminder of the magic that had brought them together and the magic they had created since. A true joining of Alpha and Seer, just as the ancient prophecies had foretold. But the real magic, Aria knew, wasn't in the stones or the bloodlines or the prophecies. It was in the trust between them, in the way Leo's hand fit perfectly in hers, in the kingdom they were building together, stone by stone, day by day. The transformation was complete, and it was beautiful. Yet even in this time of peace, dark forces stirred at the edges of the realm. The warning had come 3 days ago, carried by a breathless messenger from the northern borders. Strange lights in the sky, animals fleeing south in unprecedented numbers, village wells turning bitter overnight. Magnus had doubled the border patrols and dispatched his most trusted scouts to investigate. Aria had consulted the ancient texts brought from forgotten temples across the land, searching for any mention of similar occurrences in the past. Tonight, after the celebration, the king and queen would meet with their inner circle to discuss these troubling signs. But for now, they kept their concerns hidden behind smiles. Today was for celebration, for reminding the people of Northaven how far they had come. Tomorrow would be soon enough for worry. As twilight deepened into evening, the palace gardens were lit with thousands of lanterns, turning the space into a fairyland of soft light and shadow. Musicians played on a raised platform, their melodies carrying over the happy crowd. Children darted between adults, faces painted with symbols of the old magic, stars and moons and stylized wolves. Aria found herself drawn to a small pool at the garden's center where several children had gathered. Among them was the young seer who had given her the white flower earlier. The girl, Lyra was her name, stood at the pool's edge, her small face scrunched in concentration. She held her hands over the water, fingers splayed. Slowly, impossibly, a thin stream of water rose from the pool, twisting into the air like a living ribbon. The children gasped in delight. Even Leo, who had seen much magic in his young life, watched with wide-eyed wonder. "She's very talented," said a voice at Aria's shoulder. She turned to find Thorn standing beside her, looking exactly as he had that night in the forest years ago. White beard reaching to his chest, ancient eyes bright with intelligence beneath bushy brows. The old man appeared rarely these days, but always at significant moments. "I didn't know you would be here," Aria said, not entirely surprised by his sudden manifestation. Thorn smiled, leaning on his gnarled staff. I wouldn't miss it. The fifth gathering, an important number in the old ways. Have you seen the signs in the north? Aria asked quietly, ensuring no one else could hear. I have. Thorn's expression grew serious. Old powers stir beyond the gray mountains, powers that have slept since before Northaven was founded. A chill ran down Aria's spine despite the warm evening. Hostile? Unknown, but powerful. Thorn watched young Lyra, who had now formed her water ribbon into the shape of a small dragon that seemed to swim through the air. That one will be important in the days to come, as will others of her generation. Before Aria could question him further, Magnus appeared at her side, Leo perched on his shoulders. The king nodded respectfully to Thorn, having long since learned to accept the old man's mysterious comings and goings. The council awaits us in the small hall, Magnus said, his tone casual, though his eyes conveyed urgency. Thorn nodded. I shall join you. I have information you'll want to hear. Together they made their way through the garden, stopping frequently to speak with guests. Leo was eventually persuaded to join the other noble children under the watchful eye of his nurse, though he protested that at 6 years old he was practically grown and should attend the meeting. Not tonight, little warrior, Magnus told him, ruffling his son's hair. But soon enough. A future king must learn all aspects of rule. Leo brightened at this promise of future inclusion and ran off to join his friends, the lacrum stone bouncing against his chest, smaller than his parents, but growing stronger as he did. The small hall was not truly small. It could seat 50 at its long oak table, but compared to the great hall, it was indeed modest. Tonight, only a dozen people waited there, Lord Blackwood still powerful despite his advancing years, Lady Miriam, head of the Merchant Council, General Alaric, commander of the royal forces, High Priestess Selene, keeper of the old rituals, and several others who had proven their loyalty during the war against Garrick. They rose as the royal couple entered, bowing deeply. Respect, not servitude, Aria had come to recognize the difference over the years. Be seated, Magnus said, taking his place at the head of the table. Aria sat at his right hand, Thorn at his left. I believe we all know why we are here. Lord Blackwood, never one to waste words, spoke first. The northern signs grow stronger. My hunters report the gray forest is entirely abandoned. Not a bird, not a hare, not a wolf remains. All fled south. Lady Miriam nodded. Trade caravans from beyond the pass have stopped arriving. The last merchant to return spoke of strange lights in the sky and an unnatural cold, even for the mountains. My scouts have not returned, General Alaric added gravely. Men who have never failed to report back on time. It's as if they vanished into the mist. High Priestess Selene, her silver hair gleaming in the candlelight, looked directly at Aria. The seers in the temples report disturbed visions, fractured glimpses that make little sense. Something interferes with their sight. All eyes turn to Aria. As the strongest seer in generations, her visions had guided Northaven through 5 years of peace and prosperity. But for the past week, whenever she tried to look north, she saw only swirling mist, impenetrable even to her enhanced abilities. I cannot see beyond the gray mountains, she admitted. It's as if a veil has been drawn across my vision. Magnus frowned, his hand unconsciously moving to the hilt of the sword he still wore, even at council meetings. Something that can block a true seer's gift is no small power. No, Thorn agreed. It is an ancient power, one that predates the Alpha bloodline itself. The council chamber grew very quiet. Even the night sounds from the garden seemed to fade away. Speak plainly, old friend, Magnus said. What faces us in the north? Thorn leaned forward, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper. The frost court stirs. After 1,000 years of slumber, the Winter King awakens. Gasps and murmurs ran around the table. Aria felt the blood drain from her face. The frost court was legend, stories told to frighten children, immortal beings of ice and shadow who had ruled the Northlands before humans drove them back beyond the mountains. That's impossible, Lord Blackwood sputtered. The frost court is a myth, a fireside tale. As were alpha wolves and seers to most people until 5 years ago, Thorn reminded him gently. Not all myths are false. Some are merely history forgotten. If this is true, Magnus said, his voice steady despite the shocking news, why now? Why after 1,000 years? Thorn's ancient eyes found Aria's. Because the balance has shifted. For centuries, magic waned in these lands. The Alpha bloodline weakened. The seers were hunted to near extinction. The bond between them was severed. He gestured to Magnus and Aria. Until you two, the first true pairing in generations, your union has begun to restore what was lost. Magic flows more freely now. The old boundaries grow thin. Aria felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. Had they inadvertently awakened something terrible in their quest to restore magic to the land? The Winter King was bound by the first Alpha and Seer pair, Thorn continued. As long as their bloodlines remained separate and weak, he could not break free. But now, we've unintentionally released him, Magnus finished, his face grim. Not yet, Thorn corrected. But the bindings weaken. He stirs, tests his chains. General Alaric cleared his throat. Can he be defeated? Driven back as before? A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. Thorn looked suddenly every one of his many years. I do not know, he admitted. The knowledge of how the first binding was accomplished is lost. I have searched for it my entire life. Magnus stood, his decision made. Then we must prepare. General, double the northern garrisons. Lord Blackwood, your hunters know the Grey Forest better than any. Send them to gather what information they can without risking lives. Lady Miriam, we must stockpile supplies in case of a hard winter. He looked to High Priestess Selene. Search the temple archives. Any mention of the Frost Court, no matter how small, may be valuable. As the council members nodded their understanding, Aria felt a strange sensation, a tingling along her spine, a pressure behind her eyes. The lacrim stone at her throat grew suddenly cold, not the usual comforting warmth. She gasped softly, drawing Magnus's immediate attention. Aria, what is it? She closed her eyes, allowing the vision to come. Unlike the frustrating mist of her recent attempts to see the north, this vision was crystal clear and terrifying. Mountains of ice, a throne of frozen tears. A figure tall and beautiful and terrible, with eyes like the void between stars, placing a crown of frost upon his brow, and a voice that seemed to speak directly into her mind. I remember you, little seer. We have danced before, you and I, across lifetimes, across deaths. When Aria opened her eyes, she found the entire council staring at her, concern evident on every face. Magnus knelt beside her chair, his hand clasping hers tightly. He knows me, she whispered. The Winter King. He says we've met before. Thorn leaned forward, suddenly intent. The seer who helped bind him was named Aria as well. It was in the oldest texts I found, before they crumbled to dust. A coincidence, perhaps. There are no coincidences with the old magic, Magnus said grimly, rising to his feet. Only patterns we don't yet understand. The remainder of the council meeting was devoted to practical matters, deployments, supplies, fortifications. But beneath the strategic talk ran an undercurrent of fear. They had prepared for human threats, for ambitious lords or foreign powers, not for a mythical being of ancient days. As the meeting concluded and the council members dispersed, Magnus and Aria remained behind with Thorn. The old man studied them both, his expression unreadable. The Winter King cannot cross the mountains yet, he said finally. The binding, while weakened, still holds. We have time. Not much, perhaps, but some. Time for what? Aria asked. To strengthen what has begun. To complete what was started 5 years ago, when you two found each other against all odds. Thorn looked between them meaningfully. The joining of Alpha and Seer blood in your son was the first step. Now comes the second. Magnus's brow furrowed. Speak plainly, old friend. What must we do? The ritual of eternal binding, Thorn said. The ancient ceremony that truly joins Alpha and Seer, beyond blood, beyond stone, beyond flesh. It hasn't been performed in 1,000 years. Since the first binding of the Winter King, Aria realized. Thorn nodded. The two of you have natural power, certainly, but bound together in the old way? That power would increase tenfold, perhaps enough to reinforce the ancient barriers. Magnus exchanged a glance with Aria, silent communication passing between them. After 5 years together, they often needed no words. "What does this ritual entail?" the king asked. "I'm not entirely certain," Thorn admitted. "I know it must be performed at the Pool of Stars, high in the Moonfire Peak. I know it must be done under a blood moon, as your first meeting was. Beyond that," he spread his hands, "the specifics are lost to time." "Then we must find them," Aria said decisively. "The next blood moon is in 3 months. Not much time to rediscover a forgotten ritual." "I will search," Thorn promised, "and you must prepare. This ritual will test you both to your limits. Body, mind, soul, all will be challenged." After Thorn departed in his mysterious way, Magnus and Aria stood alone in the council chamber. Outside, they could still hear the sounds of celebration, music and laughter, their people enjoying a night of peace, unaware of the shadow gathering in the north. "Are you afraid?" Magnus asked quietly, taking her hands in his. "Yes," Aria admitted. There was no need for pretense between them. "But not for myself, for Leo, for our people." Magnus nodded, understanding completely. "We've faced impossible odds before." "And won," Aria added, managing a small smile. "And we will again." He pulled her close, his arms strong around her. "Together, as we've been since that night you opened your door to a wounded wolf and his cub." Aria leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his steadfast certainty. Whatever came next, ancient ritual, forgotten magic, a king of ice and shadow, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together. Outside, the celebration continued, fireworks now blooming against the night sky in brilliant bursts of color. For tonight, at least, peace reigned in Northaven. Leo was safe, sleeping in his royal bed, the lacrum stone glowing softly at his throat. Their people danced and feasted, free from the fear that had gripped the kingdom before their rule. Aria and Magnus joined hands, both knowing that this moment of happiness, this beautiful, hard-won peace, was worth any sacrifice, any challenge the future might hold. The Winter King might be stirring beyond the mountains. Ancient powers might be testing long-established boundaries. Forgotten magic might need to be rediscovered and reforged. But they would be ready, Alpha and Seer, King and Queen, Wolf and Watcher. Together they had built a kingdom from ruins. Together they would defend it, no matter the cost. The transformation had brought them to this moment, from broken pieces to a unified whole, from scattered sparks to a blazing fire. Whatever came next would test the strength of what they had built, but Aria knew with bone-deep certainty that they would endure. After all, they were bound by something stronger than prophecy, more enduring than magic, more powerful than any ancient king of frost and shadow. They were bound by choice, by trust, by love, and no power in this world or any other could break that bond.